Good? Okay, excellent. Oh, this got it. Excellent. Welcome to United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities this evening. We are really glad to have with us Reverend Kelli Clement as we talk about how do we provide care? What is the world like for people of faith and for people around the world as we live in a world post-Roe, Roe v. Wade? And so I want to welcome you tonight to this important conversation and introduce our speaker tonight. We're delighted to have with us one of our alums and an incredibly qualified speaker on this topic. So the Reverend Kelli Clement is Assistant Minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, where her portfolio includes social justice and pastoral care. She also serves as the quarter-time ministry for the St. Croix Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Wisconsin. She's a 2010 MDiv graduate and former board member of the United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. Kelli is also the former executive director of the Minnesota Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice and worked as a training consultant for the national office of RCRC, educating clergy around the country in pastoral care for reproductive decisions and reproductive loss. Art play as a spiritual practice has helped her cope with living through the apocalypse. So please join me in welcoming Reverend Kelli Clement.
Thank you, Justin. Always so good to be in the space of United Theological Seminary, to see the art on the walls, to be present with the pieces of the seminary that made the transition from our home in New Brighton when I was there to this beautiful space here in St. Paul. Just being with this pulpit and these chairs in the chapel takes me right back. So glad to be here. We will not be controlled. I am sovereign in my body. I am sovereign in my soul. We will not be controlled. I am sovereign in my body. I am sovereign in my soul. Once more, we will not be controlled. I am sovereign in my body. I am sovereign in my soul. Just going to change my speaker volume there and see if I have that as I wish to have it. I am delighted to be back tonight for the second of this three-part conversation about after the fall of Roe, where do we go from here? In June, we talked about the current landscape. This was before the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs v. Jackson overturning Roe v. Wade happened. We knew it was coming. And even when you know a trauma is coming, it feels like a death. It was hard. Lots of us took it really hard. And I think, I don't know that I will ever feel completely all right again. This is something that we incorporate into our lives, our spiritual lives, our meaning making of what it means to be human beings at this time and place in this country that is hostile to reproductive health, rights, and justice. And there's a lot to figure out. The landscape is moving quickly. It's quite fluid. We'll talk some more next month about what we do next. This month, we're going to talk about reproductive decisions and reproductive loss, pastoral care, a model for pastoral care around that, and also about telling our stories. And then in August 3rd, I think is our date, we'll talk about advocacy for reproductive justice from a faith perspective. And all of these talks are available on the UTS YouTube channel. So glad to have you folks who are here tonight, and there will be availability to watch them. I said earlier, and I'll say again, I make no pretense at being unbiased about this. I am unabashedly pro-choice because of my faith and not in spite of it. I believe that sovereignty over our bodies is one of the things that makes us human. As we make decisions about how we will be in the world, the ability to be in our bodies and decide for ourselves what those bodies will be is part of what makes us human. And the other thing I want to lift up again that we talked about last time was using the frame of reproductive justice, rather than being in the tussle of when does life begin, which is a question we'll never have consensus on because different religions come to that from different places. And it's not a question of science, it's a question of religion and theology. The frame of reproductive justice lifts us up out of that singular question of when does personhood attach to the three central questions belong in the frame of reproductive justice that was articulated in the mid-1990s by African-American women who said, we have to think about this in a new way. And the questions, the rights that are proclaimed in a frame of reproductive justice are the right to have children, the right to not have children, and the right to raise the children we have in safe and healthy environments. And as we know, every justice issue is interconnected. It's all intersectional. So the right to raise the children we have in safe and healthy environments touches on climate justice and economic justice or injustice, on mass incarceration, on food security, on economic inequity. All of the things are related to that. And so I think it's a very, very powerful frame. And it lifts us out of the question of what should that person be forced to carry that pregnancy to term right now. It lets us see whole communities, not just one person, not just one family, but whole communities. I'll just say it again. The frame of reproductive justice is the right to have children, the right to not have children, and the right to raise the children we have in safe and healthy environments. So hold that. Okay. So tonight I want to spend a little time talking about how we as faith leaders approach pastoral care for reproductive decisions and reproductive loss. And we'll talk a little bit about how we might tell our abortion stories. But first, I want to give you a couple of quick updates. You know, of course, that the landscape is changing quickly following the fall of Roe v. Wade, the US Supreme Court decision in Dobbs v. Jackson, which gutted Roe, which said there is no provision in law for the right to privacy. There is no provision in law for the right to privacy. It's stunning. Legal scholars find the reasoning difficult to follow. It's stunning, but that's where we are. And as you know, if you've been listening to the news, some 26 states with trigger laws. In those states, abortion has been made illegal as that decision happened. Some had a 30-day time period, and legal scholars and courts and legislators are still trying to figure out what it means. Around us, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin, there are no abortions being performed in those states right now. I believe that is correct. Minnesota, abortion is still legal. And in fact, just this week, access has been expanded. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. We don't know what's going to happen in Iowa. The Iowa Supreme Court, I think, said that there was not a protection in law in Iowa for abortion access, but they don't have a trigger law. They do have a very conservative makeup in their state house. So we'll see what happens there. Okay, this Sunday, July 17th, there is a big rally and march happening in St. Paul, Minnesota. It'll start at St. Paul College at 11 o'clock. We'll kick off then and march from St. Paul College down to the Capitol, where the governor will speak. There'll be music, people telling their stories. We expect several thousand people there. So you can find more at unrestrictmn.org. And I'll see if I can get that in the chat. unrestrictmn.org. And you can find more about that march. Let me also say a word about the recent Supreme Court, the recent Minnesota ruling by a Minnesota district judge that overturned several restrictions to abortion access in Minnesota. The congregation I serve, First Unitarian Society, was originally a plaintiff in this case. We said that access to reproductive health rights and justice is so important to us. We think it's a matter of religious freedom. And so we're joining this case. We have since left the case for kind of a complex legal reason, but we're very much in support of the lawsuit. And what happened this week is that a Minnesota District Court judge looked at a Minnesota ruling, Doe v. Gomez from 1995, and said that the restrictions on the books in Minnesota are counter to that ruling. That ruling in Gomez said Minnesotans have the right to have an abortion and the right to decide to have an abortion without the government putting its thumb on the scale. And the district judge, Judge Gilligan, said these mandates in Minnesota law are actually have the effect of putting the thumb on the scale. So they are things like, and now they have been removed from law, the 24-hour waiting period that we've had in Minnesota, that is gone. The need for minors to have the signature of both their parents, even if they didn't have a relationship with one or more of their parents, minors don't have to get that anymore in order to access abortion care. By the way, minors can get all kinds of medical procedures without having the permission of their parents, including giving birth. And so this was singling out abortion as a particular thing. One of the other ones was we have artificially restricted the number of providers who can provide abortion care by making it only medical doctors. And now advanced care practitioners, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, and other advanced care practitioners are now able to provide abortion care. And there was one that removed felony penalties for doctors. And so that means that abortions will be able to be performed in a larger number of places, including hospitals and other kinds of clinics, not just abortion clinics where there are all of these strict rules. It's great news because as people come from other states to Minnesota, Minnesota is now a receiving state, right? So as people come from North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Missouri, Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Florida, as they come to Minnesota for abortion care, they won't have to jump through all those medically unnecessary hoops and that have no basis in public health. So that's a little explanation of what's happened. It's, boy, we needed a win, and that was a good one. Okay. I've created this talk for working clergy and faith leaders, but of course anyone may find it useful. This is about a method of pastoral care for reproductive decisions and reproductive loss. Pastoral care is, as you know, it's an ancient model of emotional, social, spiritual support that can be found in all cultures and traditions. It doesn't have to be a pastor that provides it, but very often a religious leader is trained in a method of deep listening. You don't have to be religious or adhere to any particular belief system to engage in and benefit from pastoral care, but there is some training involved. As you know, folks who seek out clergy and faith leaders may not know or say that they want pastoral care or even know what it means. We providers know that we are in a practice of deep listening, of reflecting back what is said, of asking questions, of and helping people to discern where God is moving in their lives, where spirit is moving, what deep, what still small voice they might listen to find truth in helping to make a decision or to be still with a decision that they've already made. It is never a place of judgment. It is never a place of coercion. Pastoral care is never a place of judgment or coercion. So if someone comes to me with the question of whether or not they should continue that pregnancy, my opinion about that really doesn't matter and shouldn't matter. Any more than my opinion should matter about whether or not someone should stay with their partner or confront a parent or continue treatment for a difficult illness. Whew, I don't want the responsibility of deciding that for someone. That's not my role. My role is to listen deeply, to listen for maybe what's unsaid and to ask probing questions to pull that out a little bit. Christian hegemony is so deeply rooted in our culture here that even people who don't identify as pro-life, or identify as particularly Christian cannot help but to have received some of the messages that we have in this country, that have been shared in this country for the last several decades about abortion. Am I killing my baby? Is this a baby? Is this a life? At what point does personhood attach? So as much as I said all of that before about getting the conversation out of the womb, when we're in a pastoral setting around reproductive decisions, I'll keep reproductive loss over here for a minute, around reproductive decisions, it's very much about the body, the person's body who is deciding whether or not to get pregnant, continue a pregnancy, navigate loss after pregnancy, all of those things. I like to talk about reproductive decisions and reproductive loss as a whole, and then we can tease out the two, but they so often come together. I don't know about y'all, but when I was growing up, I thought when two people love each other very much and they make a baby, right? And then you have a baby, and then you raise a baby, and you're a family, and you nurse, and it's just the most natural, easy thing in the world, right? No complications, because we didn't learn about the complications. And so many pregnancies are so complicated, or reproductive journeys are so complicated. I myself have had 2 abortions, at least 2 miscarriages, have experienced the roller coaster of infertility. And when I was pregnant with my daughter, who's now 20, I knew that was the last time I was going to be pregnant. I was either going to continue the pregnancy, or if the pregnancy didn't continue because of miscarriage, I couldn't do it again. It was too much. And so then I had the experience of birth by cesarean section. It's a full package there, right? That's a lot of decisions and loss and joy and life that's all connected, originating from this body, right? So when I have the privilege to be in conversations with someone about their reproductive health journey, about their decisions about family, it is, first of all, an extreme privilege to be in that. And some of the questions that I want to ask delicately, tenderly, are about, some of the basic ones might be, what kind of religious background, if any, do you have? Are you coming to this conversation with either baggage that's heavy, or is there strength that you reach for? I've had a number of people to say to me, oh, I don't go to church. I haven't gone to church in years, but I used to go with my grandmother, and it meant something to me then. And then as a listener, you can say, talk to me about what that meant. What was life-giving? What was affirming to you about that? Or they may say, I don't have anything to do with church anymore. I'm not even sure I want to talk to a pastor. I just need to talk to somebody, but the church has never done well by me. And then there's an opportunity to say, where is your hurt? And do you want to talk about that? And that doesn't have to have anything to do with your decision, right? So finding out, I'm always interested in where someone plants their flag, philosophically or theologically, especially because I have no need to move them off that space unless that's something that they want to do. I don't think pastoral care is the place to proselytize. There may be other times for that, and there may be ways to offer spiritual support when someone invites that they have a relationship with God, or would like to have more of a relationship with higher power or spirit, or be more attuned to nature. Then that's a question that I can ask. Another important piece of this methodology is teasing out what kind of support systems the pregnant person, or the person who you're in the encounter with, has. Maybe they're deciding whether or not to get pregnant. It could be any number of things. But What's the support system? Who do you rely on? Who's your community? Who's got you? Oftentimes, when folks are making the decision whether or not to continue a pregnancy, all of that may be a swirl in their heads, who they've got for support, but naming it aloud and helping them to name it aloud. Well, I've got this part of my family, or I've got my neighbor, or my cousin, or my girlfriend, or whoever it is. Naming that aloud and being able to see it. Or, I don't have anyone. I can't tell anyone. I'm pregnant, and my parents will throw me out of the house if they know. That's real. I mean, I've been in that exact conversation with someone who was seeking care. And so, as you know from pastoral care, you faith leaders, it is so much not about having the right answer. It's about being open to the question and reflecting back and asking a few guiding questions. So, and I think what's important about reproductive decisions and reproductive loss is being extremely comfortable with the language around abortion and the outcomes of pregnancy, right? We're just not going to dance around the outsides of that language. We're going to speak the language. So I often say there are 4 possible outcomes of pregnancy. One, over which you have no control, is miscarriage. And it is thought that 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. I can't remember if I said this the first time, but when I had my first miscarriage, I was shocked. And nobody had prepared me for that. And I'll never forget a woman at church saying to me, "Welcome to the silent sisterhood." That was profound. So miscarriage is one outcome. Abortion is a second outcome, making the decision to terminate a pregnancy. The 2 that relate to continuing a pregnancy to term and giving birth would be either choosing to parent that child or making a plan for adoption for that child. So that's 4 outcomes. And when someone is coming to have the conversation about, do I want to continue this pregnancy or not, they're sometimes not thinking about all of the possible outcomes. It's, do I do this thing or not? Do I interrupt the pregnancy or not? And so being able to talk about it and say, kind of helping people to forecast a decision that you think you can live with is helpful. What will help you live well with your decision? I am not ashamed of, nor do I regret my abortions. I am grateful, so grateful that I had the ability to make the decisions that I wanted to make at the time I needed to make them, got the excellent, compassionate professional health care that I needed at the time, so that when it was time for me to parent, I could be the best parent that I could be. There are people, I have no doubt, people who do regret the decision to terminate a pregnancy. There are people who have regretted the decision to make a plan for adoption. There are people who have regretted the decision to parent. There are people who are not regretful about all of those. And so the narrative that we have gotten from the so-called pro-life movement, if you do this, you will regret it, is not a frame that is borne out by research and anecdotal evidence. As a matter of fact, the research shows that the number one response, emotional response of people after they receive an abortion that they've chosen to have, the health care that they needed, their number one response is relief. The second response is grief. Grief and relief so often in our lives are intertwined, come hand in hand. And grief does not necessarily or even often equal regret. I can have grief about something and not regret it. Grief doesn't mean that I made a wrong decision. So that's something to keep in mind as we're talking to people who are seeking our care. Will I regret this? Will I be sad about it? And a good question is, what do you do when you're sad? How do you self-soothe? What tools do you have? Or what do you know about yourself, about how you live through loss and sadness? So rather than getting hooked on, will I regret it? Am I going to be sad? We take that question, not try to answer the question itself, but take the question and go a little deeper. Talk more about that sense of sadness. Talk about what kind of parent you might want to be when you're ready to be a parent. Do you think you ever might want to be a parent? You know, there are all kinds of questions that you can ask. And you know from your own pastoral care training that we ask open-ended questions rather than yes/no questions, right? Just looking at the time and checking that I'm touching the points that I want to. We've done this training in day-long and weekend-long settings, so I know I'm not going to hit all the points, but I'm going to give you a resource for where you might go. One of the questions that I got with regularity when I was answering a hotline for people who were making a decision, the all options clergy counseling hotline, was, will God still love me? Will God still love me? And that's the place where I can pretty firmly give an opinion. I'm asked that as a clergy person, as a theologian, in that person's eyes as a representative of God. And I say, any God that is worthy of the name loves us as we are, in all of our beauty and all of our brokenness, and especially when we are wrestling with the meaning of our lives. There is nothing that can separate us from the love of that God. And I tell you, any God who cannot love us with that in the most tender moment is just not worthy of the name. I don't understand a shaming God. I don't understand it. And I don't want to. I want to meet someone where they are, and if they've grown up with a shaming God or are concerned about that, I want to speak for the love that will not let us go. And I think we can, it may or may not land in that time, but I believe that someone will have heard that. On that point, I am opinionated. It's also useful to ask that question. What do you think? What do you understand of your God? What do you understand of this God? Will God love you? what would separate you from the love of God? Sometimes it's teasing out what people have heard and have kind of gotten stuck into. Okay. Every choice, any choice that a person makes in the occasion of trying to decide whether or not to continue a pregnancy, every one of those has emotional outcomes. And I think the best we can do is help prepare people for the emotional outcomes and be a safe place for them to explore what their emotional life is, and help them know their own inner wisdom, make a space for people to listen to their own inner wisdom. And there's no right or wrong answer that I, as a pastoral care provider, am ever going to be able to provide, right? I can't know the right or wrong answer. I can only be a companion as they weigh those options. And when I was doing the clergy, all options clergy hotline, I would have intense, beautiful conversations with people that I never heard from again and would not know what decision they had made. And so as a spiritual practice, we must be centered in ourselves, be okay with letting go of that outcome, pray with people if they want that. Always, I would end with asking people if they wanted a prayer, and some did and some didn't, and then letting go of outcome. If you're in a congregational setting, this may be with someone you know, or it may be the daughter or cousin or niece or nephew. We don't always know who it will be, but it may be somebody that you have an ongoing relationship with. And so just holding that lightly. I want to shift a little bit and talk about reproductive loss. And when we talk about reproductive loss, that is any outcome in our reproductive journey that was not what we thought it was going to be, that produces an experience of loss or grief. The most common ways that shows up are experiences like miscarriage, stillbirth, infertility, abortion, the loss of a child, perhaps growing up into a family, or growing up and becoming involved with a partner who says, I don't want children. And you had an idea for yourself of how you were going to be, and that may be a kind of loss. And here's the thing about reproductive loss. People can experience it in the moment. If somebody has had a miscarriage of let's say of a wanted pregnancy, or has experienced stillbirth, those are traumatic, immediate losses, and people may or may not know about it, but they are in the moment. And if I have the privilege to walk with someone as they are in the immediate throes of that is those emotions are pretty immediate, and they may be able to talk about those that way. But the experience of reproductive loss and grief can follow someone for decades. And as a matter of fact, hospice chaplains sometimes talk about patients who are nearing the end of their lives, and they're talking about with a chaplain about what their experiences have been, and maybe they're reviewing their lives in some way. And an early, long ago experience of abortion or miscarriage or stillbirth, decades ago when those things were not talked about, sometimes those come up for hospice chaplains, or people who are nearing the end of their lives. So reproductive loss can become a part of our the fabric of our lives. And we don't know when a thread of that is going to be pulled. I'll give you the example of a marvelous movie called Philomena. Judi Dench is in Philomena. And all of a sudden, she's living her life. She's going on about her life. And one day, she realizes that she is agitated and upset, and it doesn't really come out why until a little bit later. We learn that that would be the 50th birthday of the child that she was forced to have adopted away from her. And so she'd lived her life, she'd incorporated this great loss and gone on and had children and so on. And then that day happened, and all of it came rushing back. It was it's a beautiful movie. If you haven't seen it, Philomena. But that example of how reproductive loss can have a hold on us, I think is a fine example. And if we are privileged as faith leaders to be able to receive such a story, or to walk with someone and tease out such a story, it's a gift to us, I think, and to the person we're with. And it requires that we have a facility of using the language of abortion, miscarriage, stillbirth, reproductive loss, that when you come to me, I am comfortable with anything you say to me around what you've done in your life or where your reproductive life has taken you. I hope that makes sense. I am passionate, as you can tell, about being able to open that space up for people. I'm going to send you to the resource of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, rcrc.org. That's rcrc.org. And in their learning library, I'm not exactly sure what they call it, but I think it's their learning library, they have a course on pastoral care for reproductive decisions and reproductive loss. And much of the material that I've shared tonight, it comes out of the work that the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice has done. And as you see, this is not based on any particular belief system or theology. Any faith leader in any denomination can hook onto this. So avail yourselves of that, because there's a lot more to learn than I've just touched on here briefly. The last thing that I want to touch on tonight is telling our stories. It was a moment of freedom when I began to speak my abortion stories out loud. And I say that I would not be the mom, wife, daughter, friend, pastor, seminary supporter. I would not be the human being that I am today if I had not been able to access excellent, compassionate, professional abortion care when I needed it. It has been one of the things that has allowed me to live the life that I live. I am sovereign in my body. I am sovereign in my soul. And to be able to make these choices is really important. And so to be able to tell it allows other people to tell their stories as well. So if you have an abortion story, and if it is safe for you to do so, I encourage you to learn to tell your story. Now, not everybody can tell everything all the time, and it's not always safe for some people to do so. As a matter of fact, right now, after Roe fell, there were a couple of Facebook groups that came up right away that were called camping. If you need to go camping and you can't go camping in your state, call me and I'll help you, or I'll share some resources for camping in another state. So camping became the euphemism for abortion. And I get that in some places it is not safe to talk about it. But if it is, and where it is for you in your circles, I encourage you to learn how to do this. There's Renee Bracy Sherman is an activist and a storyteller, and she her group is called We Testify, and she has created kind of a list of how to tell your stories, and so she says, here's some things. Decide how much you want to share. You may want to share a little or a lot, but you get to decide. You are in charge of telling this. All the feelings you have around your abortion are valid. If you felt regretful about it, that's valid. If you didn't feel regretful, that's valid. If you felt happy and joyful, that's valid. If you felt like God would never love you again, whatever it is, you get to have your feelings. We can share with each other and invite questions. I've shared my story a lot out loud, and I am happy for people to ask me questions, but I didn't start out that way. I didn't start out with that nice sentence of, wouldn't be the mom, wife, mother, blah, blah, blah. I had to practice it. And now I'm comfortable with people asking me questions, but you get to go at your own pace. Having support of your community, either your faith community, little bit concentric circles, or your family, or whoever your beloveds are, is important. And you may get unfriendly responses. You may have people who say ugly things to you. And it's helpful for me to have a ready response to that. If somebody says ugly things to me, I try to let it go across, because I know that they are not my intended audience. You are my intended audience. The person who is trying to make a decision is my intended audience. Here I stand, having terminated 2 pregnancies, and I'm not ashamed and I'm not regretful, and I live a full life, and I'm here to help and support. When people say ugly things to me, and I've gotten plenty of emails and mail and some ugly things, I allow myself to feel it. I can't pretend that it didn't hurt. And I say, no, thank you. No, thank you. And I practice that. Yeah, but what about no, thank you? Yeah, but what about no, thank you? It's not that I am unwilling to engage the theological, political, social ramifications of abortion, but I'm not willing to engage somebody telling me that my story is not my story, or it's not correct. Do you see the difference? There are 2 different settings for that. You don't have to share it out loud. You can write it. You could write it and burn it. You could share it with one person. You could practice it. You don't have to share it on social media. You don't have to shout your abortion, though you may decide you want to. You may get to the point where you decide that you want to do that. You're in control of that. I'm also going to share this link, which I can't say out loud Stella, it's a long link, but I'll share it with you that we can put in there. My gosh, I talked for nearly an hour with saying a lot. We have some folks with us online, and I want to ask if any of the folks who are online want to ask a question, or Justin or anyone else wants to ask a question. I would be glad to engage with that. I know this has been a lot really quickly. Any? Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for sharing, for your wisdom.
I can't hear you. Hold on a minute. We've got a little sound issue here in the room. Hold on. I'm going to go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. So just want to thank you for your wisdom and for sharing about pastoral care for those who've experienced abortions, reproductive loss, things like that. I think my question is just, do you know of any spaces in the Twin Cities area for clergy to offer pastoral care to folks who, to birthing people who are having abortions, considering abortions, or on their reproductive journeys?
That is a great question. Thank you. I do not. There has been some talk recently about a group of clergy who might be able to be present in the abortion clinics, who could offer pastoral care, though I don't know that that's wanted. So finding the place of that. There are some national all options clergy lines, all options counseling lines. I'm just gonna, I think I can even do this while we're talking. All options. One of the challenges, I think something called the All Options Talk Line is a pregnancy resource center. One of the things we want to be very careful about is that we are not engaging with crisis pregnancy centers, which are the folks who really want to push people into making the decision to carry a pregnancy to term. So the quick answer, Jessica, is no, I don't. I think I think of what we do with people who encounter us in our own settings. But I also think if you let it be known in your community that I am here for you as you're making a decision, and I don't have my only stake in your outcome is that you do what is life-giving for you, which, you know, leads to your liberation. And I think as we let people know that, and let our fellow clergy know it. I've had a number of calls from other clergy who say, I've got a person in my congregation, or I know someone, I've been asked this and I don't feel equipped. Can you talk to them? And so I think that's one of the ways that we can do this. Is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, good. There's something that I didn't say, and I want to be sure and say it. As the landscape is changing, and it's very, very fluid now, and people who access this recording later may not be based in Minnesota. One of the things we as clergy need to do now is know what the laws are of our state. And how can I help people get to the care they need? So there's a resource called Our Justice, ourjustice.net. That's the Minnesota Abortion Fund. There's the National Network of Abortion Funds, nanaf.org. They would be able to help people get to a state where abortion is available and help them navigate the complexities of travel. They provide funding for travel, hotels, the procedure itself. I had a deal with my daughter that I wasn't going to get arrested for any protest I was on while she was in school, while she was in high school. And now she's out and all bets are off. And I don't need to get arrested at a protest. That's not what I need. But I will go to the mat for somebody who needs abortion care. I will help them get where they need to go. And so as clergy people, I think one of the things we need to decide is how far we will go to help someone get the life-saving care that they need. So there, just say that. And the landscape is changing quickly and so on. Yeah, Justin.
First, I really appreciate your expansive definition of reproductive loss, because I think it appropriately complex. This second, in relation to what you were just saying, I'm very curious about how, and you might cover this in your next talk, but how we in Minnesota can extend the ministry of hospitality to those who are seeking this care in Minnesota, because we will be an island,
Right.
essentially, that people can come to, and thinking about the pastoral and moral responsibilities of hospitality, and perhaps you might reflect a little bit.
Yeah, I thank you for that. Yeah, I'll repeat that. Thank you. Justin asked about the pastoral and the moral responsibilities of hospitality as people are coming to Minnesota as an island of reproductive health care, as we are a receiving state. And I get this question quite a lot. And just was in a conversation today with the executive director of Our Justice, the statewide abortion fund. And one of the things that Shayla Walker said is, people have been doing this work for a long time. I've heard the really generous conversations that people have had about maybe we need an underground railroad, something new to help people get here. And what Shayla said, and what I think is so true, is that people have been doing the work of getting people the care they need, and we don't need to create something new. In our desire to do good and be welcoming, some of the most important work we can do is host a house party for Our Justice and help raise money to bring people here. It is not safe to invite people to come to individual homes that are maybe not vetted. During COVID time, maybe they're traveling with their family. There are all kinds of reasons that helping people get here and having them stay in a hotel is better for their physical safety and mental health than creating a network of safe houses and so on. It's a beautiful idea, and we don't necessarily need to do that. What I do think we can do as theological people is to talk about what it means to be a receiving state, to talk about the moral imperative of hospitality, to talk to our congregations, to talk to people in our networks and in our denomination, and use the words around reproductive justice and change the theological frame. Too few churches and denominations have been willing to speak out about it. They may have a letter or a statement that's been on their books for some time, but they don't speak out about it. And I think we have to speak out about it. I think we have to change the conversation from when does life begin to How do we help people make decisions that are liberatory for them? Where is liberation? What, and doing the work that we are uniquely qualified to do as public theologians, and then hosting a house party for our justice, right? And raising funds for those folks who are already doing that work in a really powerful way. I'm always wanting to interrogate where whiteness has its hooks in me, and to be a do-gooder. It's good to do good, but I want to be a do-gooder, and I want to have a good idea and do that. And in fact, the frame of reproductive justice, and especially of people of color who are already doing this work, my best play is to help support them and ask what they need to continue it going on. Next session in August, we're going to talk about what it means to do activism from a faith perspective. So we'll talk some more about that. Is that helpful? Okay. Let me see. I want to see if there's one more question in the chat. No, I don't think so. Oh, beloveds, thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts, to get all passionate and worked up about it. You can tell that I can talk about this for hours at a time. For better or worse, this is the place where I hang my hat, and I'm so grateful in these difficult times to have this good work to do. I honor the work that you are doing in your settings wherever they are, and honor that in busy days you spent this time with us here. One of my favorite poems, readings, prayers is from the United Methodist minister Ted Loder. I thought I just had it up here. Ted Loder said, "Empower me to be a bold participant rather than a temporary saint in waiting in the difficult ordinariness of now. To exercise the authority of honesty rather than to defer to power or deceive to get it. To influence someone for justice rather than impress anyone for gain. And by grace, to find treasures of joy, of friendship, and peace hidden in the fields of the daily you give me to plow. Blessed be. Amen, and good night."